The school hallway was alive with the usual sounds of a busy morning. Lockers slammed shut as students hurried to get to their next class. There was the low murmur of friends chatting, the distant sound of shoes squeaking on the polished floors, and the occasional shout of someone calling out a friend's name. The air smelled faintly of cafeteria food and cleaning supplies, a mixture that somehow made the hallway feel both chaotic and familiar at the same time. Students moved like rivers, weaving through the crowds, laughing, joking, and occasionally bumping into each other. It was the kind of ordinary school day that felt predictable to anyone who had been there a long time. But today, something was about to break that routine. Among the students, a young girl in a wheelchair navigated her way carefully through the packed corridor. She was small but determined, her hands gripping the wheels as she moved forward with steady determination. Her hair was tied neatly back and she wore a light jacket that flapped slightly as she maneuvered. She knew how crowded hallways could be, how easily someone could bump into her or block her path, but she moved with confidence. She had been coming to this school for a few years and had learned the rhythm of the place. Still, even with her experience, she couldn't help noticing the small group of students gathering near the lockers ahead, their laughter carrying through the hall in sharp, mocking tones. The group of bullies was easy to spot. They were taller, louder, and always seemed to find trouble wherever they went. Their eyes darted around the hallway, scanning for someone they could intimidate or embarrass. Today, their focus had landed on the girl in the wheelchair. They whispered to each other, smirking and nudging each other as they sized her up. For a moment, it almost seemed like they were playing some sort of cruel game, and the girl could sense it. Something in the way they watched her made her uneasy. She slowed down, trying to gauge if they were just loud and obnoxious or if she really needed to be cautious. Around her, other students seemed caught up in their own world. Some were chatting in groups, completely unaware of the tension building nearby. Others glanced toward the scene but quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. There was a kind of invisible barrier that often formed in school hallways. Most students would rather watch from a distance than step into a situation that could make them a target. The girl knew this too, which made her feel a little more alone, even though the hallway was full of people. She pushed on, determined to reach her next class, hoping that the bullies would lose interest and move on. Despite the anxiety bubbling in her chest, there was a quiet courage in the way she moved. She had faced challenges before, both in navigating the crowded halls and in dealing with people who didn't treat her with respect. She had learned to stay calm, to keep her focus, and to avoid letting fear take control. Yet today something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with a sense of anticipation she couldn't quite explain. She glanced at the bullies again, noticing the way they exchanged looks and smirks, the kind of expressions that meant they were plotting something. Her hands tightened on the wheels and her heart raced a little faster, but she didn't stop. She reminded herself that she had every right to move freely through the school, just like everyone else, and that she wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. Meanwhile, the bullies were getting more confident. They were used to attention and power, and seeing her pass by felt like an opportunity they couldn't resist. One of them leaned casually against the lockers, watching as she approached. Another whispered something to the group, and all of them laughed quietly, their eyes never leaving her. They thought this was just another easy target, someone they could humiliate and walk away from without consequence. The girl noticed the subtle shift in their energy, the way they straightened up, the way their laughter grew louder, the way they seemed to almost anticipate the moment of confrontation. Around them, the hallway continued as usual, a mix of chaos and normality. Some students paused to watch, curiosity flickering in their eyes, while others kept their heads down, pretending not to notice. Teachers were somewhere in the distance, their attention on the classes they were hurrying to, unaware of the storm about to unfold. In that moment, everything seemed suspended. The sounds of the hall dimmed in her focus, and all that remained was the approaching group and her own steady determination to keep moving forward. It was just an ordinary day, yet it carried the tension of the unexpected. The girl in the wheelchair had no idea what the next few minutes would bring, but she sensed that today, the hallway was about to become a place where courage, fear, and resilience would collide. She rolled on, ready to face whatever came, unaware that the incident about to happen would not only challenge her, but also set the stage for an incredible act of bravery that no one would forget. The moment seemed ordinary at first, but in the blink of an eye, everything changed. The group of bullies had been waiting, lurking near the lockers with their mischievous smirks and whispered plans. Their eyes followed the girl in the wheelchair like predators sizing up their prey. She was focused on moving forward, unaware that the laughter and shoves behind her were about to turn her day upside down. One of the bullies, taller than the rest and with a mean streak that seemed to grow by the day, suddenly lunged forward. In his hand was a small juice box, bright and innocent looking, but in his mind it was about to become a tool of humiliation. Before she could even react, he tipped it over her head. The sweet liquid spilled over her hair and clothes, soaking her jacket, her backpack, and even her wheelchair. The cold, sticky juice ran down her face, leaving her stunned and frozen for a split second. The laughter that erupted from the bullies was sharp and cruel, echoing through the hallway like a wave of mockery. The girl's hands gripped the wheels tightly, but it was too late to avoid the mess. Her heart pounded, a mix of shock, embarrassment, and frustration. Around her, the hallway seemed to blur as whispers, giggles, and gasps filled the air. Some students stared openly, unable to look away, while others averted their eyes, pretending nothing had happened. For a brief moment, it felt like the world had narrowed down to the sticky mess on her jacket, the cruel laughter in her ears, and the cold realization that she had become the center of someone else's entertainment. The bullies stepped back, smirking and elbowing each other as if the act were some sort of game they had just won. They whispered and laughed under their breath, clearly proud of the chaos they had caused. To them, this was just another day of asserting power, proving that they could intimidate anyone without consequence. They didn't notice the few students who were quietly shaking their heads, feeling a mix of pity and anger at the cruelty on display. The girl in the wheelchair felt her cheeks burn, not just from embarrassment but from the sting of unfairness. She had done nothing to provoke them, nothing to deserve this humiliation, and yet here she was, soaked and exposed in front of her peers. For a moment she felt small and powerless, the kind of helplessness that anyone who has faced bullying knows all too well. Her mind raced. Should she cry? Should she scream? Should she confront them? But before she could decide, a strange calm began to settle over her, like a whisper reminding her that this moment, as painful as it was, would not define her. Around the hallway, reactions varied. Some students whispered to each other, debating whether to step in. Others watched silently, unsure how to respond. The teacher's footsteps could be heard in the distance, but they were too far away to intervene immediately. The bullies, confident in their perceived victory, didn't notice the tension slowly building around them. They were focused solely on their laughter, unaware that their actions had set something much larger in motion, something that would not let them walk away unchallenged. The scene lingered in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and tense. The girl in the wheelchair wiped some of the juice from her face, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes never left the bullies. She realized that this was not just a random act of cruelty. It was a challenge, a test of character for everyone who witnessed it. And while she felt vulnerable, a spark of determination began to glow inside her. She would not let this moment break her spirit, even if it broke her clothes. Little did anyone know, in just 20 minutes, the hallway that had been filled with laughter and mockery would witness a reversal of power, a lesson in courage, and a moment that would make the bullies regret underestimating the strength of someone who refused to stay silent. For now, though, the hallway buzzed with the aftermath of the act, sticky and chaotic, leaving everyone, including the bullies, unaware of the storm that was about to come. The hallway seemed to hold its breath after the juice splashed over the girl in the wheelchair. For a moment, the chaos of the school day faded into an almost surreal silence, broken only by the soft squelch of liquid under shoes and the faint drip from her jacket. The bullies stepped back, grinning at their so-called victory, but the reactions of everyone around them told a different story. Some students froze in place, their eyes wide, unsure whether to intervene or stay hidden in the safety of inaction. A few whispered quietly to each other, the tension in their voices betraying their discomfort. "Did you see that?" one murmured. "That's so mean," another replied, shaking their head. But even as their words expressed sympathy, fear held them back. Intervening could make them the next target, and in the complex social landscape of high school, courage often wrestled with caution. Others, bolder or less empathetic, couldn't resist watching with morbid curiosity. They edged closer, trying to catch every detail. The shocked expression on her face, the smirk of the bullies, the way the juice ran down her clothes. Some giggled nervously, unsure if laughter or silence was the right reaction. their own discomfort turning into an awkward echo of the cruelty they were witnessing. Teachers were still a few steps away, their eyes scanning the crowded hall for trouble, but not yet focusing on the scene. The tension hung heavily, like static electricity before a storm. Every glance, every whisper, every subtle movement added weight to the moment, making it clear that something important was unfolding, even if no one could yet predict what. Amidst all this, the girl in the wheelchair felt a strange mix of humiliation and resilience. She could sense the silent judgments, the whispered sympathies, the uncertain eyes of her peers. And yet for every face that looked away, there were a few that stared with quiet admiration. They weren't cheering her humiliation. They were watching, recognizing the unfairness and waiting to see what would happen next. The bullies, however, were oblivious to this complex web of reactions. Their focus was narrow, fixed on the immediate thrill of power. They hadn't noticed the subtle glances exchanged between students, the tiny shifts in posture as people started to pay attention, or the way the atmosphere around them had changed from casual hallway chatter to something charged with anticipation. In that charged air, a new figure entered the edges of the scene, a girl who had witnessed the entire act. She moved through the hallway with calm confidence, her eyes scanning the group of bullies and the girl in the wheelchair. She understood immediately what had happened, and more importantly, she understood what needed to happen next. Unlike the silent observers or the hesitant students, she was ready to act, to transform the tension in the hallway into a moment of justice. For the first time, the bullies noticed her presence. They exchanged uncertain looks, sensing that this moment might not end as they expected. The hallway, once just a passageway of laughter and casual chaos, had shifted. It was no longer about a simple act of cruelty. It was becoming a stage, one where courage, justice, and quick thinking would soon take center stage. The reactions around were more than just background noise. They were the early tremors of a turning point. The whispers, the stares, the hesitant movements, all of it built toward something greater. Something that would soon make the bullies realize that their actions, however bold they thought them, had consequences. The hallway was alive not just with students, but with the quiet electricity of a moment about to change everything. Amid the tension and whispers that filled the hallway, a new presence emerged, a girl who moved with a calm confidence that immediately drew attention. She wasn't loud and she didn't push through the crowd aggressively. Instead, she walked with purpose, her eyes sharp, scanning every detail of the scene ahead. It was as if she had a sixth sense for injustice. She could feel the unfairness in the air, see the cruelty etched in the bullies' smirks, and sense the humiliation lingering on the girl in the wheelchair. Unlike the hesitant students who watched silently, or the teachers who were still a few steps away, she seemed ready to step into the moment with intention. Her presence alone began to shift the energy of the hallway. Students who had been frozen in uncertainty now glanced at her, sensing that something different was about to happen. Even the bullies, confident moments ago, caught a flicker of unease in their expressions. She was known in the school for her courage, for speaking up when others stayed silent. But what set her apart was not just bravery, it was intelligence, strategy, and a deep sense of fairness. She didn't act recklessly, but she didn't hesitate either. She understood that confrontation didn't always need anger or shouting. Sometimes the most powerful impact came from being calm, focused, and assertive. As she approached, her gaze met the girl in the wheelchair. There was a brief, reassuring nod, a silent message. "I've got this. You're not alone." In that small gesture, the girl felt a spark of hope, a reminder that courage could appear in the most unexpected ways, and that someone would stand up when the world seemed silent. The bullies, sensing that their audience had changed, exchanged nervous glances. The laughter that had once echoed so boldly through the hallway faltered, replaced by an awkward tension. This girl wasn't just a bystander. She was a force they hadn't accounted for, someone who could turn the tables if she chose to. Every step she took toward the group was deliberate. Her presence was magnetic, drawing attention without demanding it, making everyone in the hallway aware that the moment was shifting. The murmurs of students rose slightly, curiosity turning into anticipation. There was a sense that something important, something just was about to unfold. She didn't rush or yell. Instead, she assessed the bullies with steady eyes, noting their overconfidence, their reliance on others' silence, and their mistake in thinking that power came from cruelty. She was calm, but her mind was sharp, already planning the words and actions that would expose their behavior. In just seconds, the hallway transformed from a place of mockery and embarrassment into a stage for justice. The quiet confidence of this black girl, standing firmly against the cruelty, sent a ripple through everyone present. It was no longer just about humiliation. It was about accountability, courage, and the reminder that standing up to wrong could inspire everyone around. The air seemed to hum with anticipation. Every student watching, every teacher approaching, every whisper in the hall now felt part of a story that was about to be written in real time. And in that moment, one simple truth became clear. The bullies were about to realize that power gained through cruelty is fragile, and courage, when wielded wisely, can change everything in an instant. The hallway was still buzzing with tension, the echoes of laughter and whispers, blending into a low hum that made every step feel heavier. The girl who had been watching from the edges now stepped fully into the scene. Unlike the bullies, she carried no anger, no aggression, only a sharp focus and a quiet determination that immediately commanded attention. Her approach wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, calculated. Every movement was a message. She was here and she would not be ignored. She first assessed the bullies, sizing up not just their behavior, but their confidence. They believed they owned the moment, that the humiliation they had caused was permanent and unquestioned. That overconfidence, she realized, was their greatest weakness. With careful precision, she began her plan. Not a wild confrontation, but a strategic disruption that would turn the hallway into a stage of accountability. Her first move was subtle, but powerful. She caught the eyes of nearby students, many of whom had frozen in uncertainty. With one small, confident gesture, a nod and a reassuring glance toward the girl in the wheelchair, she sent a silent signal. "Watch this. Stand for what is right." Slowly, the attention of the hallway shifted, the murmurs growing into a quiet tension that seemed to ripple toward the bullies. Suddenly, the laughter that had felt so dominant moments ago began to falter. Then she addressed the bullies directly, her voice calm, firm, and unwavering. "Do you really enjoy making someone feel small?" she asked, stepping closer, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Do you think this makes you powerful? Or does it just show everyone else who you really are?" Her words were precise, measured, but they carried the weight of truth. For the first time, the bullies' smirks wavered. They shuffled uneasily, caught off guard by her composure. This wasn't just another student calling them out. This was someone who understood their cruelty and wasn't afraid to expose it. She didn't yell, she didn't shove, she didn't act recklessly. Instead, she used the power of observation and awareness. Her eyes swept across the crowd, making sure the bystanders noticed the injustice, making the hallway itself feel alive with attention. Each glance she shared with other students was intentional, a subtle nudge to break the unspoken rule of silence that had allowed bullying to thrive for so long. The energy around her shifted, and the bullies could feel it. They had been used to control through fear and isolation, but now the crowd was watching. Next, she exposed the absurdity of their act with a quiet, cutting clarity. "You think dumping juice on someone in a wheelchair is funny?" she asked, letting her words sink in. "You think no one will care? You think this makes you stronger?" The bullies blinked, uncomfortable, shifting weight from one foot to another. The hallway had gone from a place of casual chaos to a charged environment. Every student aware of the moral imbalance. Every teacher now closer to noticing the unfolding situation. Her strategy wasn't just confrontation, it was psychological. She made them uncomfortable without raising her voice. She used the spotlight of the hallway to show everyone that cruelty cannot hide. The bullies, who had once believed they controlled the moment, were now losing it. Step by step, glance by glance. Their confidence cracked, replaced with confusion and insecurity. Meanwhile, the girl in the wheelchair, soaked and humiliated moments ago, felt a surge of hope. For the first time since the incident, she realized she was not alone. This brave girl standing before the bullies was more than an ally. She was a catalyst for change. She was turning the tide, showing that power didn't belong to those who humiliate. It belonged to those who stood for justice. The hallways themselves seemed to respond to the shift. Students whispered and leaned forward, some subtly pointing, others simply watching intently. Even the teachers began to notice, quickening their pace toward the center of the commotion. The tension in the air was thick, a palpable anticipation that something decisive was about to happen. The bullies, sensing their audience had changed, became anxious. Their jokes faded, their smirks wavered, and their once assertive stance softened. Every word, every glance, every careful step of the black girl was part of a bigger plan. She didn't just want the bullies to stop. She wanted them to feel the consequences of their arrogance, to understand that cruelty carries weight when someone refuses to stay silent. In her strategy, she had turned the hallway from a place of humiliation into a courtroom of moral accountability, where the bullies' actions were on trial before everyone present. And in those moments it became clear that the plan was working. The bullies' power, once absolute in their minds, was crumbling. The girl in the wheelchair, the bystanders, and even the approaching teachers all contributed to a moment of reckoning, and it was only a matter of time before the balance of control shifted completely. The hallway had transformed. What began as an act of cruelty was evolving into a story of courage, intelligence, and the undeniable impact of standing up for what is right. The hallway was electric, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. The bullies who had moments ago laughed with confidence now shifted uneasily under the intense gaze of the black girl standing before them. Their arrogance, once so bold and untouchable, had begun to crumble. The energy of the hallway had changed. What was meant to be a simple act of humiliation had transformed into a public stage for accountability. And the girl in the wheelchair, once the sole target of ridicule, was no longer alone. The hero didn't shout or threaten. She simply held the space with authority, her eyes locked on the bullies, and the calmness in her expression amplified the tension. It was as though she was silently saying, "You thought you could humiliate someone, but now the spotlight is on you." The other students, sensing the shift, began to murmur quietly among themselves. These whispers weren't of fear, they were of recognition. They were noticing the injustice, understanding the cruelty, and without even realizing it, supporting the girl who had chosen to act. The bullies glanced around, suddenly aware that they were the center of attention in a way they had not anticipated. Their laughter had disappeared, replaced by nervous fidgeting and exchanged glances that revealed their growing uncertainty. One of them took a small step back, as if instinctively trying to regain some semblance of control. But the hallway seemed to close in, the walls echoing back the weight of every student's gaze. Then, with a voice steady and unwavering, the black girl spoke again. "Look around," she said, gesturing subtly toward the students watching. "Everyone sees what you just did. You humiliated someone for no reason, and now everyone knows who you really are." Her words didn't shout. They pierced quietly but sharply, and the bullies felt the truth sink in. Their smug expressions faltered, replaced by confusion and embarrassment. A few of the bystanders, inspired by her courage, began to speak up, their voices tentative at first. "That's not right," one student whispered. Another added, "You can't treat people like that." These small statements, though quiet, amplified the impact. The bullies were no longer alone in the spotlight. They were now isolated, surrounded by a crowd silently condemning their actions. The tables had turned entirely. The girl in the wheelchair looked up, a mixture of relief and admiration in her eyes. She could finally see that this wasn't just about humiliation, it was about justice, and she wasn't just witnessing it, she was part of it. The once powerful bullies were shrinking under the weight of attention, their laughter gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that filled the hallway more than any words could. Even the teachers arrived at the scene in those moments, their expressions stern as they took in the situation. The bullies, caught between authority, peer scrutiny, and the strategic presence of the black girl, could feel their confidence evaporating. What had begun as a petty, mean-spirited act now felt like a public reckoning, one that they had no control over. The hero's strategy had worked perfectly. By remaining calm, commanding attention, and speaking truth with precision, she had transformed the dynamic entirely. The bully's power, which had relied on fear and silence, was stripped away. The girl in the wheelchair, once a victim, now felt seen and supported, her dignity slowly returning with every passing second. The hallway, once dominated by mockery and humiliation, was now filled with a quiet sense of justice and moral clarity. The moment lingered, heavy and powerful. The bullies were no longer laughing, no longer smirking. They were forced to confront the consequences of their actions in real time. And the other students, inspired by the courage and intelligence of the black girl, realized that standing up for what is right could have an immediate, transformative impact. In those 20 minutes, everything had changed. The bullies had underestimated the strength of courage, the power of presence, and the ripple effect of one person refusing to stay silent. The tables had been turned completely, and the lesson was clear. Cruelty might seem powerful in the moment, but when met with strategy, bravery, and conviction, it can be dismantled quickly and decisively. As the hallway slowly returned to its normal rhythm, the energy remained different, charged with the memory of what had happened, the awareness that justice had been served, and the understanding that sometimes one person's courage is enough to turn the world upside down, even in the smallest corners of a high school hallway. The hallway, once a chaotic scene of laughter and humiliation, began to settle into a tense quiet. The bullies, who had so recently felt invincible, now stood frozen and awkward, their expressions betraying a mix of embarrassment, anger, and disbelief. Their smirks were gone, replaced by an uneasy awareness that their actions had consequences far beyond what they had imagined. The weight of accountability pressed down on them like a sudden storm, one they could neither escape nor ignore. The girl in the wheelchair, drenched and still trembling slightly from the earlier shock, felt an incredible sense of relief wash over her. The sting of humiliation was still there, lingering in her soaked clothes and messy hair, but it was now accompanied by a profound sense of support and justice. She looked at the black girl, the one who had stepped in when no one else dared, and her eyes were full of gratitude. There was a silent understanding between them. Courage, when wielded with intention and clarity, could change the course of a moment and sometimes even the course of a day. Nearby students, who had been hesitant or unsure how to react, began to breathe a little easier. Some whispered among themselves, their words carrying admiration for the brave intervention they had just witnessed. Others nodded subtly, as if acknowledging that standing up to wrong wasn't just a moral choice, it was a necessity. The atmosphere, once heavy with tension and cruelty, shifted toward one of reflection and awareness. Even those who had not participated in the confrontation could feel the weight of the lesson that had unfolded in front of them. The teachers arrived fully at the scene, taking in the situation with sharp eyes. The bullies, now fully aware of the consequences awaiting them, faced a mix of disciplinary action and the realization that their peers had witnessed everything. Their confidence, which had seemed unshakable just moments ago, had completely eroded. One of the teachers gently guided the bullies aside, explaining that their behavior was unacceptable and that there would be consequences for their actions. In that moment, the bullies understood something fundamental. Humiliation gained through cruelty never lasts, and when confronted with courage and truth, it can be dismantled instantly. Meanwhile, the students in the hallway began to return to their routines, but something had changed. Conversations carried a new awareness, a sense that cruelty and bullying were not to be ignored or dismissed. The girl in the wheelchair, who had earlier felt exposed and powerless, now felt a growing sense of strength. She realized that sometimes, even when the world feels silent or indifferent, allies can appear at the exact right moment to tip the balance toward justice. The black girl, who had acted with intelligence and courage, became a quiet hero in the eyes of everyone present, not just for intervening, but for showing that strategic courage could inspire change without chaos or aggression. As the minutes passed, the bullies were left to reflect privately on their behavior. Their laughter was gone, replaced by uncomfortable silence and the dawning realization that their actions had been witnessed, judged, and corrected. The hallway, which had once been a stage for mockery, had become a classroom in its own right, a place where courage, empathy, and accountability had taught a lesson far stronger than any detention or punishment ever could. The girl in the wheelchair took a deep breath and allowed herself a small smile. The day had not ended as she had feared, and she felt empowered in a way she hadn't before. She had seen that cruelty could be met with courage, that humiliation could be turned around by someone willing to act, and that even in moments of fear and embarrassment, support could appear when it was needed most. And in that hallway, still carrying the faint scent of spilled juice and tension, something lasting had been created. A memory, a lesson, and a reminder that the strength of one person, when guided by courage, empathy, and intelligence, can transform an entire situation. The bullies had been held accountable, the victim had been uplifted, and the witnesses had learned that silence is never the only option. The hallway may have returned to its ordinary rhythm, but the story of that day would linger long after. A story of humiliation turned into justice, Fear turned into empowerment, and a simple act of cruelty met with a courageous, unforgettable response that would inspire everyone who saw it. The hallway had finally quieted down, the echoes of laughter, whispers, and tension slowly fading into the usual rhythm of a school day. Yet, for everyone who had witnessed what had unfolded, the memory of those few intense minutes remained vivid, lingering in the air like an invisible mark that could not be erased. What had begun as an ordinary day, a simple walk through crowded hallways, had transformed into a profound lesson on courage, justice, and the power of taking a stand. The girl in the wheelchair sat quietly for a moment, her hands still resting on the wheels, and allowed herself to reflect on the chaos that had surrounded her. She had felt helpless, exposed, and humiliated just moments before, but the intervention of the black girl had changed everything. The fear and embarrassment that once weighed heavily on her shoulders now seemed lighter, replaced by a growing sense of empowerment. She realized that courage doesn't always come from those in the spotlight. Sometimes it comes quietly, deliberately, from someone willing to act when others hesitate. Students who had been bystanders also began to reflect. Some admitted to themselves that they had been too afraid to intervene at first, but now they saw the impact that one determined person could have. The bravery of the girl who had confronted the bullies had created ripples of influence, reminding everyone that standing up for what is right, even in small ways, can inspire others to do the same. In that moment, the hallway was no longer just a passage between classes. It had become a classroom of life, teaching lessons that no textbook ever could. The bullies, meanwhile, were left to process their actions and the consequences. Their confidence, once unchecked, had been dismantled, and they were forced to confront the reality that cruelty and arrogance carry consequences when met with courage and moral clarity. For some, it was a moment of shame. For others, perhaps a long overdue lesson in empathy and accountability. Whatever the outcome, they had learned that power gained through intimidation is fragile and fleeting, especially when challenged by someone who refuses to stay silent. As for the black girl who had acted, the experience reinforced a simple but powerful truth. Courage is contagious. Her intervention had not only protected the girl in the wheelchair, but it also inspired everyone present to reconsider their own role in moments of injustice. She had shown that standing up doesn't always require anger or force. It requires awareness, intelligence, and a willingness to act when it matters most. Her presence had transformed fear into hope, humiliation into justice, and a fleeting moment of cruelty into a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls of that hallway. Reflecting on the events, it became clear that this incident was about more than spilled juice or a moment of embarrassment. It was about human dignity, empathy, and the choices we make when confronted with unfairness. Every witness, whether a student, teacher, or staff member, had seen how quickly the balance of power can shift when courage is exercised wisely. They had seen that one act of bravery could change the story entirely, turning a potential tragedy into a moment of triumph and moral clarity. And perhaps the most important lesson of all was this: standing up for someone else, even when the world seems indifferent, can create ripples far beyond what we imagine. The courage of one person has the power to inspire, protect, and transform. The humiliation that once seemed permanent faded in the face of support, strategy, and truth. What remained was a memory of resilience, an example of bravery, and a reminder that justice can be served in moments big or small. As the students went about their day, the hallway returned to its normal pace. Yet the story of what had happened lingered in every glance, every whispered conversation, and every silent reflection. It was a story of courage overcoming cruelty, of intelligence outsmarting arrogance, and of humanity reclaiming dignity. It served as a reminder that life often presents moments of choice, moments to act or to remain silent, and that the decisions we make in those moments define who we are. In the end, the hallway had witnessed more than a simple act of bullying. It had witnessed a triumph of justice, a lesson in moral courage, and the quiet, unstoppable force of one person willing to make a difference. And that lesson would stay with everyone who saw it, quietly shaping their actions, their courage, and their understanding of what it truly means to stand up for what is right.